All right, it says that we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Sunbro. He is a critic of mine, and he brought a list of things that we potentially disagree on, which I'm very thankful because I actually forgot some of them. So it's just going to be a casual conversation. Did no research or preparation at all. Classic, my style. But yeah, so Sunbro, I guess you can introduce yourself in a very casual type of way.
I am just a dude on YouTube. Nothing different than that. Over 40. I have wife, kids, so I'm probably older than most people here, and I suppose I am living the dream, as it were. I work in financial institutions,
Nice, very
so
professional, grown up. Hold on, let me try to post a link on Twitter. I always forget to post when I'm doing a stream because I stream so periodically.
no, I understand. Funny enough, I actually worked many, many years ago in collections and customer service telephone, so that definitely kind of sink or swim back then. I like collections; it was very cutthroat.
That doesn't sound very fun.
Well, it really wasn't that fun,
Yeah.
but it was definitely a learning experience. It was just actually started it because I got fired from another job, and I walked in to a employment office and just like, where are you working? I need a job. Literally the same day I got fired, I walked into the employment office and like, I need a job, and they sent me to a call center, and that eventually transitioned into just a like Christmas job, taking overflow
Yeah.
calls to a real job, and then bigger and bigger and bigger over the years.
Nice.
So
Well, hey, good for you. I'm
I
hoping.
never I never would have thought that would have turned into a real job. But okay, I need to yell at you some so that people
Okay. All
yeah.
right. Lay it on me. Don't hold back. What am I wrong about? All
Okay. The biggest thing that is so
right.
irritating to everyone else that's not a lefty is the economic takes that you leftists take. It
Mhm.
is so irritating. And here is one thing, for example, that I never see taken into consideration in any type of policy or economic proposal. Life is a series of trade-offs.
Mhm.
You never get all good with something. You always get negative things. This is generally why we prefer liberty, so that people can make choices, so that you can choose the trade-offs that you want and they're not imposed upon you. So when we have a social security system that is imposed upon you, you do not get to choose the trade-offs for that, of saving, not saving, of where you want to put your, just all that stuff with it. And that just never seems to enter into consideration. They always are like, this will just work out. Nationalize the healthcare system. It'll be great. And that's the way it's sold. And it's like, guys, girls, everything in between and beyond in this universe, it will not work out that way.
So, what do you think? So, I tend to lately, I've been, I went through my anarcho communist kind of idealistic, super idealistic phase. And now I'm kind of at a point where I'm just kind of I liked Bernie Sanders, kind of like a SocDem, kind of like a mix of like a more regulated market with some socialistic aspects. Um, so, what do you think of something? Because that to me, I'm feeling like I'm pretty moderate now and kind of uh, but do you think someone what do you think of Bernie's ideas and whatnot?
Terrible.
Terrible.
Terrible. Okay, this is another reason why. Not only does it not take off the life as a series of trade offs, and so, if we're going to respect human beings, their dignity and value, each person should be allowed to choose the trade offs that they want, that they're willing to accept. Because some people are willing to accept way different trade offs and other people aren't. But the second thing is that the incentives for a large government is not to solve problems. So it doesn't matter what even good ideals you start with, if you funnel it through a federal government system, they're not going to solve the problem. Like the war on drugs, the war on poverty, all that stuff. They never solve the problem. They only grow and grow because they're incentivized to not solve the problem and in fact find more problems, whether they're real or not.
So are you full? You said you used to be more libertarian. Are there any government programs or institutions that you think work well? Uh,
Currently, most of them don't because of the incentive problem. Probably the best government system that we have right now is the military, if you just want to go on pure efficiency, but it does eat up a lot of our money. So that's just, it's like the best by default, not because of any intrinsic value that it has. Um, Another way to think of it too is that it's like, because I have kids, I've interacted with the public school system and with the private school system. I can tell you that as a parent, you have so much more power. Even if you're just one of 200 parents at a school, you have so much more power at that private school. They listen. They will do what you want. They will just do what you want, you know. And I don't think that most people really get the idea that I think the public school system at this point is almost, like torture to children to send them to. It's
I mean, I guess
gotten
it
so bad.
depends. It varies so greatly in like different areas. Like I'm someone who's gone to multiple different schools from,
Hmm.
moving around a lot when I was younger. And for like my early years, I lived in a fairly like wealthy community, and the public schools there were great. I was like on the soccer team, like totally kind of like ideal situation. And then our economic situation changed, and I went to a very different public school that was completely a mess, a disaster. Like there was just way too many kids in a classroom, no supplies. Teachers did not give a fuck. They literally, and the students were just out of control. Like I had seen teachers cry. It was like out of like a bad movie. And I ended up actually dropping out like again, and just didn't, go back after that. So I guess it varies a lot, but I feel like, I mean, what's the alternative is to have like just private, like, do you think that's something that the government shouldn't be involved in?
This is the thing is I want everybody to decide for themselves. So basically, my ideal scenario would be that the federal government would just withdraw. They would just withdraw from schooling entirely, and each state could decide what they want to do. If the state wants state-run public schools, that's fine. If they want to not have any schools and just have private schools, charter schools, and that sort of thing, homeschooling, that's fine. But I would let each state decide how they want to run their school system.
But do you see how that could totally like not work out for people living like in poverty, where going to a private school isn't an option, or even homeschooling isn't an option? Like I was homeschooled, and that entailed me literally just being left to my own devices. It was not, in
This,
order to be
yeah.
properly homeschooled, you need to have
Oh
a
yeah, you need
yeah,
a full-time parent to do that. Yeah, which
exactly.
isn't.
Yeah.
I understand that's not necessarily accessible for most people. This is the thing is I don't know exactly what people will decide, but the thing is that if they have the freedom of choice for each individual state, they can actually choose the trade-offs that they want, and they will see them actually happen in real time. So they very well be still a public school system that's perfectly accessible. I'm not saying ban public schools. I'm just saying withdraw the federal involvement in the schooling system. That's all, and
So have
let
it
each
be
state go.
purely funded just by like income tax, or by
However the states choose to fund them,
uh-huh.
however they choose to do it.
I wish I was more articulate on the matter, because that seems like it would be a disaster.
Well,
But
no, but this is the thing too, is we don't know exactly how it would work out. But this is the one thing that also don't understand, that leftists don't understand, is let's say my imaginary idea actually happened, which is not, that's not going to happen. Okay, the most that we will ever get is voucher programs. But
mhm.
but let's say the federal government did withdraw, and it was just a disaster across all 50 states. Just everything collapsed, and it was even worse than the current school system. You can just bring the federal government back in. Like you can always, they will be right there waiting.
After many lives are ruined,
They, I,
that, and also, what do you say about like most, European and like Nordic countries seem to have like very robust education system and social programs that ends up working out quite nicely for them. And I know they're a different, it's very different than the United States, but it seems like that general path seems to be what works in like every other developed nation for the most part.
this is the funny thing, is that yeah, they are very different. They're not like the United States. The
Yeah, I
United
know
States
they're like
is
massively like
huge,
smaller.
diverse, yeah. But this is the thing that I would even say to that is, okay, maybe they've got it figured out. Okay, well, if we actually institute with the withdrawal of the federal system and each state is allowed to do it how they want, then guess what? They could implement the Nordic system if they so choose. See, this is the thing that I'm talking about, trade-offs. People actually get to choose.
So you
And this,
think you want like each state to kind of be like its own country in a way, or
which
like
is
you're very much for like states' rights? Because if that
just
was the
standard
case, a lot
federalism.
of red states and states in the South would be completely screwed, because they're so heavily reliant on tax funds coming from larger cities on like the coasts. You know what I mean?
There would definitely be a shifting around of things. And this is the thing, is that you could even have states, if they so choose, you could have three states band together and make their educational system together. They don't have to be separate. I just want to give everybody the choice of
Uh
what to
huh.
do. That's all that I want. I want everybody to have the choice of what to do. And right now, the only choice is for rich people or people that sacrifice very much, like I do, because I'm not rich to send my kids to a private school. And I don't see how this system is tolerable, that poor people have no choice in their schooling, basically, for the most part, but rich people do. And everybody's like, yeah, that's fine. Let's just leave it the way it is.
But wouldn't that continue, like, if you eliminate like any publicly or like, federally funded programs and whatnot? Wouldn't that just only exacerbate the wealth inequality and inequality of opportunity?
I'm not worried about wealth inequality per se. Okay. Well, what I am concerned about is that people can't make the choices, even with the meager means that they have. But the other thing too that I don't think anybody considers is that, people donate a lot of money nowadays. Like if you look at all the companies that wanted to give BLM all the money, and there is no reason that in our current system where we have the GoFundMes and all the other systems that we have available, that people in a local community could not organize to get money for a school system.
Well, the way GoFundMe, it seems like they have like, you only really hear about the like successful GoFundMes, but there's like millions of them that never take off. I've seen a lot of different local GoFundMes for like even important things, like how people have to GoFundMe for medical procedures to save their own lives because that's how fucked up our fucking healthcare system is right now. That doesn't seem to be working.
I wouldn't say it's perfect by any means, but I would also say that nobody feels responsible to donate the help because it's already taken care of everything by the government for the most part. So no one's going to donate. It's not even anybody's frame of mind to donate to a school right now. Like who donates to their local public school?
People totally, they have like little kids. They put them out to work to try to get money for the school by selling candy bars or washing cars. Like the schools, they're definitely.
I don't mean guilt trip you. I mean, like people actually would be like, I do think that there would be a shift in people's minds. Now, this is the thing too, is like I'm saying, I don't pretend that I know exactly what would be the best system. And my actual suspicion is that there is no one best system, that each locality is going to need different systems based upon their populations and the environment that they have. Okay. There's not going to be one top-down system that's going to work for everybody. There just isn't going to be like that. I think that's just flawed. It's just going to lower everybody down. Like as you've seen now in our school system, the scores only keep getting lower. Literacy is not very good, and it's not going to get any better. And that's the main thing. Give each state and each person just the freedom to choose the education that they can within whatever means they can acquire, whatever it may be.
But it's like there's a lack of freedom that comes when you have just like completely unbounded like capitalism, because what happens is instead of the government having some type of power, and the government is just what collectively, ideally, if we had an actual democracy, it's what people vote for. So it's in the people's interest, they control that. But when it comes to just massive wealth, you see the huge inequality of power that creates, where there isn't like democracy in a workplace. You're completely at the mercy of what, boss or whoever the wealthier owner is. Do you know what I mean?
No,
it's like
that's a valid concern to raise. That also we see how powerful people like Twitter and the other, other titans of industry are.
Like they control information. They have a monopoly. Like that's what we're seeing happen.
But the other thing I would say is that partially what gives them that power is their involvement with the federal government. Like Amazon is, has a record of not paying any taxes at the end of the day. Well, why is that? It's because they send tons of lobbyists and tons of people to get favorable legislation, or they get really smart attorneys that just look through the tax code and find all these loopholes for them. They have the means to spend for that. So, like I said, that's actually a separate issue, how to handle the corporations, the mega corporations almost that they're turning into.
Well, I'd say kind of it's like connected, because that same mechanism would transfer into any other aspect of society where market and profit is the only thing that's really dictating. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like if the government isn't the one that's like institutionalizing a program, then there's some other power form that's going to fill that vacuum in a way that doesn't necessarily serve our interests, as opposed to with an ideal government, we would be collectively voting for our interests. And government gets a lot of shit, but in a way, it's actually remarkable that millions and hundreds of millions of people coexist in a way that isn't complete chaos. And we do have institutions, and we have roads that we drive on, and we have, the post service, which I know is getting a lot of shit right now, but in general, we have a lot of things that we take for granted, and we just assume like, oh, government does that. And even with public schools, like that's a god saver for people who have to work during the day and can't afford childcare. And I think it's critical to make sure that for a functioning country and democracy, we need to have like an educated public. Do you know what I mean?
No, this is actually something that I've long considered is what is the number one issue? Because I think at least on people that are on the right or even just a little bit right, they have no single issue to coalesce around. They have nothing to actually push for. And I think the most important issue is education, mainly because you can't solve any of the other problems or even talk about them intelligently if you don't have a base of knowledge.
Yeah.
So we have got to get a real education system back in so that people, and like I said, I don't know what the perfect things are necessarily going to be. Probably the best things are things that nobody's even thought of yet, to be honest. But we will never get there if we don't have a good base of education that people can actually understand things, that they can see the past, what's happened, what's worked, what's failed, and actually make intelligent decisions going in the future. And that's why in a lot of ways, I do feel that, the only people left that are getting a real education are the people that are homeschooling or private schooling or charter schooling. And the public education, I think you'd be even surprised, even if you talk to some people that are in school. I listened to a live stream earlier today. They were talking to a 17-year-old who's in an AP English class. And he was so disheartened because all they're doing is reading like little info texts and learning vocabulary. And one of the vocabulary words was like obfuscate was the vocabulary word that
Yeah.
and he's like, this is an AP senior, English class, and I'm learning vocabulary. He's like, this was like, what I think it's slid downhill quite a bit just from what I can see. And that these really are just bad babysitting factories almost.
But I see that as like an issue of funding. Like there's other countries that pay their teachers a lot more, so the teachers are invested. They're not, completely burnt out on their jobs. They're not teaching in classrooms that are overfilled with, kids that have, probably behavioral health problems from their own, perhaps it's tied into like our broken mental health care system. There's just so many ways that it's like interconnected where it seems like instead of, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, it's like, I think we could do more to invest in education to make it work better. I know it can seem like, oh, if we just throw money at the problem, it's not going to go away. But I think it's a matter of investing in a way that is evidence-based and will have good results. And it seems, I just can't imagine.
It is intuitive in a way for those on the left. I understand that if you spend more money, you'll get better results, because that is a lot of times the way it works in life. If you spend more money on a car, you typically get a better car. If you spend more on your shoes, you actually get a higher quality of shoes. So that makes sense in that immediate life interaction that we all have. However, the thing that you're not considering is that this is not a regular life interaction. This is more of what's the incentives for the teachers in school? Like, what are they actually incentivized to do? And
well, that's why it needs to be good funding combined with like good policy together, because just throwing money at an issue with people who aren't trained in how to utilize those finances, they aren't financially literate, then that's not really going to have the desired impact. So
until people can walk away from the school and the school loses their funding, they will never change. People have to have the option to be like, no, I don't like this school, I'm sending my kid to this other school. So whatever system we have to have has to give parents that option to do that, to walk away, and that school actually loses money because they have no incentive.
So many student casualties in the mix of like, all right, we let a school crumble on its own. Like that's essentially what would happen if enough people leave the school. You know what I mean? It's
maybe the school should crumble if it's a bad school. That's what.
But then there's going to be a lot of kids who are totally fucked for that, and probably kids in communities that are already fucked in a lot of ways. So that could have like resounding impacts, like for generations. It's not just like, oh, like these kids will bounce back and find another option. It's like, no, a lot of these kids aren't in a position to really bounce back. And
look at it this way: it's just like our national debt. We've been spending way out of our league for a long time. And even if you were to personally do that with a couple of credit cards that you had and you took out too many loans and you had to go without for a long time to pay those back, there will be some pain in whatever transition period we're having. But this is what I'm going to say anyways. Hey, this transition period is happening whether anybody likes it or not. It's going to happen. And if we actually decentralize the choices so that everybody can make their own choices about it, there will be less pain, and at least people can choose the pain that they have rather than being subjected to it from a top-down system where everybody's just locked in for the most part, except for the rich.
It's just like, I feel like it just would self-replicate that same dynamic where I think the only way to kind of moderate society is to like have some form of redistributive wealth going on and investment into programs to help the less fortunate, because that's the only way we can kind of truly create an equal playing field.
Well, okay. That's an interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Well, kind of. It's just, I don't know what an equal playing field necessarily means.
I mean, it can never be fully equal, but it could be like, say, if there's kids born into poverty, maybe they can have access to food assistance so that they can have nutritious food, or maybe they can have access to free childcare so that the parents can work, so that they can live in a safer area and, go to a better school and et cetera. You know how it's kind of like a domino effect of if with the right funding. And I admit there are, like, I actually am on Medicaid, and the way it works right now is I am incentivized to stay under a certain poverty line, because once I go over that, all of a sudden I'm going to be paying thousands for prescriptions. And that's a stupid setup. The way it's set up is stupid. So that's why having the option isn't always as free as it seems. Or like you were saying, like how just throwing money at something doesn't work. It has to be done in a way that makes sense with like accompanying policy that makes sense. So ideally for me, we would have some form of like universal health coverage, so that I wouldn't have to choose between like staying in poverty and having health insurance versus moving up and losing health insurance and kind of being just as fucked.
Yeah,
You know
I would definitely agree with you that is a very wicked system that's set up for people. That they have to either lie about their income, do stuff under the table to actually increase the money that they make, or they have to just kind of stay poor to get the benefits they have. Yes, that's an awful system, and definitely needs to end in one way or another. But given that aside, I don't know, I was talking about healthcare. Healthcare is another thing that's weird. See, this is the benefit that comes from being older, is because I actually saw when things were different, when things worked way better.
Wait, I was going to say when things were worse, because I grew up without health insurance for a substantial portion of my childhood, and that was not awesome. I remember when like Obamacare came out, and it was the first time I ever got insurance, and I was able to go see doctors and get help for various health issues I've had. But I mean, that's just my personal experience. I don't know.
I'll give you an example. I had healthcare because I worked, for a company, and I actually was involved in a motorcycle wreck. I was on the motorcycle, and I had to go to the emergency room. Now, how much do you think an emergency room costs today? A visit to get X-rays, the whole shebang.
I think the minimum, if I recall correctly, is like maybe like 700 or something for like an ER, maybe like with the ambulance. I don't know. This is guessing based on my last trip, which was like a while ago.
Well,
so
my wife happened to go to the emergency room a couple years ago, and thankfully we had insurance, and she wasn't seriously hurt, but although she was hurt a little bit, but not seriously. And it was definitely over $1,000, and we didn't use an ambulance. What I paid back then, back in the early 90s probably, was just $100. $100 with my insurance actually covered x-rays for my shoulder and my back and my knee, because all of them were messed up. And I mean, that's unreal. Like I have trouble even saying that it actually only cost me $100 to do that. And like I said, I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. I think that is foolish, just to pretend that we know, but we do know some things that won't work because we've tried them, And
Mhm.
spending more money under our current system is definitely not going to get any better results.
But
We
wouldn't
really,
we be actually spending less in the long run, considering that right now we spend more than any other developed country? And you see countries like England and Canada seem, their systems have their issues, but generally the countries take great pride in them. And even people on the far right of those countries tend to want to keep at least some of the way their health system
well,
is.
see,
You know.
this is the thing that I also don't understand is that here in the U.S., like we have a state like Massachusetts, I believe it was that Romney came from, Mitt Romney. They have like a universal health care there. At
Mhm.
least that's what's touted. So, I mean, there's nothing that's preventing each state from enacting their own health care. If they actually wanted to cover their own residents, they can do that. There is nothing against that in the Constitution or any legal legislation that I'm aware of. I don't understand what the opposition, especially from the left, because I see this from all leftists really. Like, are you familiar with Brett Weinstein?
Yeah.
Okay, I like the guy. I like the guy a whole bunch. I love hearing his science stuff, talking all about the
I
evolution.
disagree with him on like a lot of his takes, but I actually do listen to his podcast with him and his wife. I actually
Yeah,
listen to them a lot because I'm interested in like evolution and stuff. But just for the record, I do not agree with Brett Weinstein on on
no,
most
no.
things.
What
I just like
is
listening to them
no.
talk for some reason.
Nobody agrees with everybody on everything, and I don't agree with a lot of his policies either. But I do like the guy, and I do find it very informative to listen to him. I usually learn something, and but the problem that I never see anyone say on the left is they never want to actually shrink the federal government. They don't want to let each state choose their own course of action. And I don't, it's like that was the whole idea of America was that we would have 50, well, it wasn't 50, of course, at the beginning, but 50 states now. And they would each choose different policies and different ways of living their life that they chose. And we would actually let them do that. And they would reap again, that's that trade off. They would get the positives and whatever negatives also came along with that. But at least they got to choose it.
But isn't this is kind of like what the whole Civil War was about? Well, technically, the Civil War was about state rights, but that was like a large part of it was because they were arguing over, oh well, some states should be allowed to have slavery, but I mean,
I,
would
yeah,
isn't that kind of like anti-American or something?
no. Okay. Well, each state is
Why
allowed.
would make
Like
any
you'll
sense?
like you'll notice right now. Like some states have an income tax, some have a sales tax, some have both. Okay, that's
Mhm.
not. We don't go to war over that. Oh, everyone must have a sales tax or everyone must have
And
an income
technically,
tax.
I would be like, if we left it up to individual states to be entirely like independent, guess what? I'd be fucking fine because I'm on the coast with a large tax base, plenty of rich people. It would be all the flyover states that would get fucked. They would be fucked.
Well,
Like,
here's the thing: is I don't know that we know exactly what would happen in the mix of that, but it is. You have to understand. I'm not talking about 50 countries. We still have the Constitution and the
oh, yeah.
federal government educating between us. So we're not going to suddenly enact slavery or like no, that's not allowed. You still have to follow these base rules that we have set out.
I know, but even just like so, not having any like federal tax between the states, it would just be all localized. Is that what you kind of are advocating for?
No, I mean, obviously the feds would have to collect some tax of some form because they're still going to be around doing
I mean,
stuff.
but like funding for like state programs would be localized. So is that what kind of you're
Well,
saying?
it would be within the state. So like, the state of Montana, they could choose, okay, we're going to have a sales tax, 5% income tax, 10%, and that's how we're going to do our funding. Or whatever system, they choose to do, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. These are economics in general are not. That's something I'm still learning about. Like I've been like doing more research, like on like with healthcare and stuff, because I idealize like Nordic countries. It seems like they always just rate the best in like happiness and like with wealth inequality and gender equality, all these things. It seems like they've got something figured out. So that's why when people say these things couldn't work in America, it makes me think like, well, it seems to work in all these other places, but then there is the fact that America is huge and America is like, technically it is like a bunch of smaller countries and there's so many different
The
viewpoints and we're
Nordic countries also, I think if you dig into that a little bit more and you don't listen to just leftist sources, the story is a bit more complicated in those countries. It's not
and I know they have like really high like taxes for
they
wealthy people, but for me it's like I feel like, once you get to a certain point of I don't think there's any labor that a person can do that's worth billions of dollars. At that point, it's just hoarding and loopholes. I just see no labor that one person's doing that can be worth billions, So for me, I don't see an issue with redistributing when it gets to massive levels of wealth. Like in an ideal society, I see there's like a level of economic freedom, like, maybe you can become like a millionaire, and it's like, if you were a millionaire, you could live great, like like once it gets beyond a certain point, it just becomes like a disgusting level of wealth. And it's always at some costs. Like not everyone can be ultra wealthy. There has to be, someone else who's like creating that wealth that they're not receiving their portion of it.
Something that's always confused me about how here, at least in the US, we view wealthy people as like Bill Gates or even Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. Like, I don't understand why we listen to these people or think that they're moral authorities, because they certainly act like it. The CEO of Apple. And I don't, because I mean, to be all that, okay, you got rich. That probably means at the best, you're a cutthroat businessman. Mm-hmm. And you probably did squish a lot of people, metaphorically on your way up there. You're probably not the most pleasant person to be around. Highly disagreeable if you want to pull in a psychology trait. Why do we pretend that these people have any moral authority? They're probably just assholes, really, in real life. Like, they're not pleasant people. I mean, like Musk has been married, like 5 times or something, I mean, he's probably a really rough guy to be around. He probably does, though, have some talent. I don't, it's a little bit too much to say whether somebody I think deserves money or not, but I definitely can sympathize with at least those on the left that see that wealthy people are so lauded. It's almost like they're treated as the Achilles of modern day time, when they're really not. You're just greedy. Maybe you work really hard.
It's nepotism and, wealth being passed down from generations, and people who, do manage to, move up maybe from like the middle class to being uber wealthy. But a lot of it is based on like investment. So they use money to make money, and then they use money to make money. And it's like, what are they really contributing to society? Like, what labor is that?
I think what you're referring to is what the Weinstein brothers call the rent seekers. And that's a little more complicated. I don't understand it all myself. There's definitely some people that don't seem to necessarily, that we can obviously say are contributing a whole bunch. But this is, again, another thing that I don't understand on the left, because part of the reason that it facilitates all of this rent-seeking behavior, where they're not truly creating any opportunities or wealth or creating a product or even a service that is very valuable for people, is that they get to, basically the banks get free money from the government, quantitative easing. And I don't know how familiar you are with the fractional reserve banking system that we have.
Not familiar.
Well, there's no need to go bunch into it, because even a lot of it I don't understand myself. But basically, what is the point of the federal government printing or digitizing money and just giving it to our banks? That is the greatest, probably. Like, I don't understand why leftists aren't trying to burn down the Federal Reserve building, because they're literally printing money and giving it to the banks and Wall Street instead of giving it at least to the people, which is what most leftists would want, like a UBI system. And they do this every single day. And the left is just like crickets.
All right, wait, Lucy, can I tell you something? We could talk about how the left, this is something I think that is a symptom of people, is like a lack of education and understanding and how these complicated systems work. I don't think it's fully like on the left, though. I think the left has its own like unique manifestations. But I think if you looked at like your average Republican, I feel like they probably wouldn't be super enlightened on like, the intricacies of like the economy either. So just to be fair, I want to put that out there.
You are correct. But usually most Republicans' gut instinct is to save money instead of spend money. And leftists are like, spend the money.
There's different types of Republicans. There's like the elite, wealthy Republicans, and then there's the poor Republicans who are constantly, being duped, into thinking that they're just, going to be a millionaire soon enough once that wealth just trickles down onto them or whatever.
I understand what you're saying, and yes, let's not pretend. It's just with like the Weinsteins that I see, listen to you and some other lefties. It's like the economic stuff gets. It's just like, oh my god. I just want to. I just need them to stop this. So if you do want to learn about economics, please read Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics.
I think I read one of his other books. It was more like about race. I think I always forget he's like an economist.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll read that amongst other things. I'm not like
Yeah,
hugely a fan
you
of
can't.
his ideology in general, but I don't know his views on economics, but I can imagine I probably wouldn't love them.
Well, at least at least what other people are thinking that are smart. Like, see, this is my other issue with you is you listen to the far right people, the crazies. And it's like, these people aren't any good. Like, you can't listen to these people.
Oh yeah,
Come
I
on.
try. Show me the smarties, okay? Because I like listening because I can't argue with someone unless I understand what their point is. It's so pointless watching people argue and neither one of them even knows what the other one's position is. So I listen. I guess I'm just most fascinated by like more like extremist movements because I see that as something that's like kind of like an epidemic that's like preying upon the mental health issues of like young people. So it's like pertains to like other interests of mine that come together into me being interested in these like extremist factions of the internet and how we can kind of bring these people back to reality. Because I think ultimately like online radicalization could be the end of us, like in general, because people are living in their own little universes of misinformation.
Well, I don't want to downplay the concern of that necessarily. Like, nobody wants, white supremacists, rampaging the streets. And you are correct that most of these fringe ideologies do take people that have been treated poorly by society, whether real or imagined, and they're at the bottom rung. And this is the same thing that the Marxists do. They take people that are aggrieved in society and they nurse that grievance. Just the same thing as the people like the far rights would do. Like,
I would say like righteously. Like I'm not full blown Marxist because I'm not. Well, I'm not as familiar enough with this theory to say I'm a full blown Marxist, but like also in general, from what I know, I cannot comprehend that happening in the United States anytime soon. But I think a lot of his ideas make sense conceptually. It's like a very different way of looking at things we take for granted insofar as like how money and capital and property and all of those things work. We just kind of have learned to view this as like the natural order in a way that's very unquestioned in the same way that back whatever the prior economic system is, I forget what it was called. Oh my gosh. Before capitalism, whatever, when it was like kings and common people, I think serfs.
monarchies, feudalism.
Feudalism. Yes.
Okay.
Like how people used to take that for granted as the natural order. That's kind of how I see Marxism is to capitalism, what capitalism is to feudalism, if that makes sense.
Yes, and this is the thing is that another thing that's hard with this grievance mongering, as it were, is what I kind of see it as, is that people do have real grievances. Most people have been, especially if you're low status in a society or poor, you have probably been treated poorly many times throughout your life in a lot of ways. But nursing that grievance doesn't benefit you or society. You've got to be able to move past the wrong that was done to you to be able to have a better life. That doesn't mean that you have to pretend it didn't happen. You don't even necessarily, whether you forgive the people personally that did that to you or not, but it's not, nursing that grievance isn't going to lead to a good outcome for you or society. Like, you've got to be able to rise above that as a human being.
I mean, I think it's like a combination with like, someone has like a legitimate grievance. I think it's important for them to vocalize that so that they can organize and change the system. Like as people have done many times, we're always kind of gradually moving closer to some kind of like American ideal that we have. So I think people can like have valid grievances, but maybe not make that their full-time, identity and viewpoint of the world. Because like I know for myself, I've definitely gotten in. I'm someone who struggled with personal responsibility, and definitely felt like when I've been more in the mindset of feeling like helpless, in a way, there's valid obstacles I've faced in life, but all I can do is advocate for systemic change. In the meantime, I've got to do something for myself, and it can be like a harsh pill to swallow for sure.
Yeah, I mean, people don't naturally want to take necessarily personal responsibility, but once they get a taste that, oh, if I'm actually personally responsible for these things, that means I can change them. If I'm not personally responsible for them, I can't change them. And that's very defeating to the person. And almost in a way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that if someone truly thinks that the problems that they have are not, they have no control over them, they can't affect them, what are they supposed to do? That's where it's really destructive to an individual that they learn that. And and this is something else too that I can think about as I was growing up as a young kid, because I actually live in the South and I'm mixed race. So, and this was back in the late 70s and early 80s, where it was, you did still have more overt racism.
Hmm.
And if I let, even though it wasn't, it wasn't really bad, but they would say sometimes some things and some people would treat me a little bit differently. Even though it wasn't really that bad, I could definitely see that if given the right incentives, if I could nurse that grievance, that would be very destructive. And
Hmm.
that there's no need, if someone doesn't like me because of my skin color, there is no need for me to give into that and to respond accordingly like they want, like a negative reaction. And I think it makes a much better, happier person because of it. I mean, I really see like people that, because a lot of people also, when growing up in high school, like a lot of them are just ignorant. They just don't know. Some of the people that I grew up with, they never met anyone that had a different skin color, and they were just repeating what the parents said. And what's funny is even in high school, some of the people that would make fun of me because of my skin color, at the end of high school, they were sorry for doing it. They'd
Hmm.
actually grown and matured as a person. But I also, I didn't respond to them in a negative fashion. I didn't yell at them. I didn't cry. I didn't run away. I didn't have that. And they actually matured over that time frame. And that's in partly why I feel like in some ways that, um, you know, growing up, I always felt that, each couple of years there was less racism around, less racism around, less racism around. Now, of course, I don't live in a big city either. Now, I understand a big urban center is an entirely different ballgame, and those, that's something different. But I really do feel like race relations overall were quite good in the '90s, and we're on a good trajectory, and not perfect, certainly not perfect, but on a good trajectory. And they've kind of taken a back seat now, which is funny given that I think the broader society is kind of willing to do whatever needs to be done to fix the problems to a degree. Nobody wants to be called a racist anymore.
I mean, that's true. I think, I think, like I've kind of like I used to be more like racist. Like I was definitely racist when I was younger, and even still, like I try not to get too sensitive over the thought of me being racist because I think it's like people are imperfect and everyone has their biases. So for me, I feel like the key is to acknowledge like I am going to have like racist biases and to just be aware of it and do your best to counteract that as much as you can. But like if someone said I did something racist, like I'm at a point where I could accept that criticism without thinking that they were saying like I as a whole am like some evil person. It's more just like I can be sexist too, or whatever bigotry. I think people can be like a little oversensitive about being called racist, and I also think people can call things racist too often as well. That's
Well,
kind of
yeah, that's that's
thoughts.
that's definitely happening right now in society, and also it's counterproductive. I don't know if you've ever heard about somebody called Daryl Davis.
Um, I don't think so.
He's a musician. He's a black man, and he's converted or deconverted about 200 KKK members over his lifetime. And he has done that through his music, because he used to play in bars and stuff like that, and they would just come up and start talking to him, and because he formed personal relationships with these people, and they realized that everything they'd been taught about black people, because they never met one, was wrong. And this is why I don't understand, again, if I truly felt someone that I knew personally was racist, I would just want to talk to the person,
Hmm.
because how else, if they have that problem, How else are they going to solve it? You're not going to solve it by yelling at them.
I
And
mean, it's, I think the key to like combating, because it's like there's, you know, there's interpersonal racism, and then there's like racism on the systemic level of how different policies impact different races differently. So I think that there could be like a multitude of ways of deactivating that. Like, you know, it could be by humanizing, you know, or just like talking to someone and trying to like get through to them. Sometimes anger and outrage is effective too, and sometimes massive protests are effective. Like even right now, the protests get a lot of shit, but my state just passed like legislation on police reform, and there has been results of it. Even if the protests aren't always pretty at all, it's been effective in dealing with that type of racism. Um, Even though it may not be as effective on, say, like an interpersonal level, it can times like these can kind of stoke up individual biases. It seems, at least from what I can gather, I haven't really been out in the real world in like that much the last year.
well,
So
it is people's right to peaceably assemble and to protest if they feel that they've been wronged by their government. And that's, a founding American principle to do that. Obviously, that is not looting and rioting, but you are allowed to go out and, protest. I mean, that is a fundamental American right. And I would encourage people to, this is the funny thing is, I don't know if you remember, but quite a few years back, the KKK used to come out and, walk through towns and do their own, protest, I guess, as it were, for their things. And I actually found that very comforting in a way, because it was like, oh, look at these 15 oddballs. Obviously, they're low status, they're poor. You can just tell by how they look and interact. These are not cream of the crop by any means. But it's like, look, they can walk through our city, they can walk through this society, and it doesn't bother anybody. And they just go home and that's it. In some ways, I think people peaceably protesting is actually a good sign. That is healthy of a society, no matter what they are. The people that were protesting Wall Street a few years ago, Occupy Wall Street.
yeah,
Now it started to go bad near to the end. I know there was a lot of problems. There was some sexual assaults and there was theft and stuff. But at the beginning, it started off as that's fine. You should be allowed to do those things, and that's a sign of a healthy society. But it's not healthy, one, if people can't go out and protest, if they get beat up by cops. And it's also not healthy if people go out and burn stuff down. That's not, those are two bad signs for a society. And I don't know. I would definitely tell anyone that if you feel you have been aggrieved, you should definitely lodge your protests, but you should do so in a peaceable manner. That's our American right to do that.
yeah. And I tend to take the more pacifist approach. I can see like a justification for like maybe destruction of government property. So with like say the burning down of a police station, I can see that as more justified than like the looting and burning of like small businesses and stuff that have nothing to do with the issue, if you know what I mean. And I could see like the utility of even rioting per se. I'm not saying I don't know how much utility it's having right now, given the way the polls are looking. I'm not sure if it's really going to work to our favor. But
No, that's definitely not going to help by any means. But
it seems like it's like, with the elections coming up, and it's just things have gotten so it has gone past like destruction of like government property to really protest the government. Right or wrong, that's one thing. It's like a separate thing to me than like looting and burning private businesses, because those neighborhoods sometimes don't bounce back from that.
They definitely
Like,
don't. The damage can be decades before it even
yeah,
recovers the area. The other thing too is that I would say is that I can understand on an emotional level that if a particular police department was egregious to the members of its community over the years and that it got burnt down, I would still say those people were in the wrong for burning it down. But I can't understand being mad at your local system that continues to refuse after decades and decades. And that's what I see partially, at least I would guess, that we're seeing in a lot of the blue urban centers that are having a lot of rioting and looting problems currently from their peaceable protests, or mostly peaceful protests. That's probably a lot of resentment, because these areas a lot of them have been controlled by Democrats for 50 years or so, and they continue to neglect these poor communities and let them just wallow in filth, basically. And all the promises and the sweet words that they tell them end up being lies. And if you do that for so long, of course people are going to be mad. It's like, that's why I don't understand why this doesn't happen more regularly, honestly, in these cities where people are in ghettos and they're not given a sufficient education. They don't understand what's going on around them. I'm surprised, honestly, that more actual politicians haven't been shot. I don't understand why they continue to put up with that.
Yeah, and I mean, just because I'm in the left doesn't mean I condone Democrats. I think the Democrat Party is like horrifically corrupt. Just like our government institutions in general, you're seeing the public, you can hardly get people out to vote because they feel like it doesn't even have an impact because everything is so driven by campaign finances and, corrupt corporations, Jeff Bezos and those people, mixing in their money. And it's unfortunate because I feel like there's a lot of potential in these institutions to serve people, but it is surprising that more people don't riot more often.
I honestly feel that way in a lot of these, like I said, the big blue urban centers where people are stuck in ghettos, and they are, in a large part, legitimately kind of stuck there. And
I feel like it's when you get into like, the thing is, I feel like most cities, it's like they have their own unique obstacles because they're densely populated, versus say red states that tend to be very like rural. So they face like separate issues. But I feel like it isn't something that's like intrinsic necessarily to like democratic institutions that breed this like horrible inequality. I think it's more just like when you have a dense population, it can like exacerbate underlying issues.
I think what I would say about that is that the more people you get together, the better moral system, almost in a way, and a philosophical underpinning system that you have to have, because it's like a pressure cooker. So if you only live with a neighbor that's right next to you, but he's 5 miles away, chances are probably pretty low that you'll have that many interactions. But when you have hundreds and hundreds of people living on top of each other, if you don't have better systems in place, just like if you had a subway system, right, just to move these people around, if it's not a really good subway system, it's going to be a problem for those people. But if the subway system required for 2 people that live 5 miles apart probably doesn't have to be that efficient.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't really know that much about like how rural governments. I've always lived in like cities, like I mean, generally like smaller cities, but that seems better off than a lot of red states, at least from like metrics I've looked at.
I don't know. I think it's more of a personal decision how you live your life and what you want basically out of it. Life is what you make. And if you have a family that you love and that's around you, you could live in a cave or you could live in a mansion and it would still be a good place as long as you have the family. And that's one thing that we could talk about, is how young women.
I don't know what your other list of disagreements were for me. So yeah, I hope it's talking about somewhere.
No. Okay, so
bring out young women. What?
That they have been lied to and deceived.
By feminism, feminist brainwashing into thinking that they want these big careers, and then they turn 30, their eggs are all dried up. They don't have families because they were shamed as they told the housewives to go fuck themselves. I know exactly what you're gonna say.
Okay,
just say
that is a part of it. However, I think both men and women have been lied to, and this is what I can say after having my own kids and even having them, right after I was 30, is that for a man, when you have kids, it's changes your frame of mind and matures you in a large way. Now, obviously not all men. Some can still act like complete 15-year-olds their whole life, but you do have a greater opportunity with children as a man. And I know in our current society, we don't want young people having kids. And I understand that there are even some good reasons for that. But we have to remember that for most of our evolutionary past that we've been geared to, that we've evolved in, we had kids when we were young.
When we were like 14.
Yeah, when we were young. Okay, basically,
Yeah.
And that it really does make a difference, and there is a large disservice, certainly even on the men's side. See, this isn't just a man and woman issue. That's also what I wanted to bring up, is that men are actually losing out a whole bunch by not having children either. Just as women, I do truly feel that women are also losing out for most. Now, there are some women and some men that are more hermits. They don't want to have kids. Like Nikola Tesla, he never had children. I don't even think he had sex actually, his whole life. But
It's
he,
disgusting. So who
yeah, but he contributed a lot to society. So he had his own interests, and I and I just don't hear any messages that women get that, what, having a family and children will probably be the most rewarding thing that you will ever do throughout your life. Not even being a CEO of a company will be as rewarding actually as having children. And for men, it changes their mindset and gives them motivation and to be a better person.
but I feel like any criticism you could give, like, oh, women aren't being told about the joys of like family. The same goes for men. There's a long-standing like stereotype of the man who put all of his energy into work, and then found himself old and alone, living this empty lifestyle, or he did have kids and didn't spend time with them. To me, I feel like that's just like a human issue, and I don't think it's a specific issue that women are facing, because the fact is, I mean, women are having kids later, and in more stable environments with more stable income, to raise a child. And, we have a lot of fertility programs, so we're not as bound as, we don't need to pop out kids when we're like a teenager. If anything, we see that doesn't tend to go well when people have kids, at a super young age.
Well, I'm certainly
Um,
not advocating for going back to our hunter-gatherer past. Let's keep things legal. But um, but like I said, see, this is where it comes up as a fight again, and it's like I just want people to be aware of the choices and that not everything has an upside. There's always a cost, but also a benefit. There's ups and downs for every choice you make. There is no just good choice. And that is what I think has been lied to about women, is that they were told everything will be fine. Everything. Nope, everything will be fine. It's like, I don't know. I don't actually think everything will be
I
fine.
don't think women necessarily were told anything. I think women fought for the right to work so that they could have financial independence and not be reliant on men, and so that men wouldn't have to be the sole caretaker of a grown person. It's terrifying to think that I could have been born into this world and my only means of survival was to marry someone, whoever that might be, and financially leech off of them for my whole life and not be able to divorce. Think about it. Like, think about for you if the roles were reversed and you were unable to support yourself unless it was through a romantic partner, and then you had to ask for every penny that you got. And, God forbid if they died, or God forbid if you got a divorce. I
I
think people overlook that that's truly what women working was about. It's not about like, oh, we loved this idea of being like a role playing a CEO and like, oh, that seems fun. It's about financial independence. And then secondary to that is, fulfilling, your passions or purposes, if you are so lucky as to have a job that, even gives you any sense of purpose or passion.
Well, this is where I want to break out of this frame, because I don't like arguing where we have to go back or things have to stay the same. And I am not advocating for a return to a past system, because that is not going to work with our current environment. And what men and women's relationship will be going into the future, if we are successful at getting past this bottleneck, this filter that we're having right now, it will be something different than what it's ever been. But it won't entirely neglect the past, because our evolutionary history, our biology, or even our psychology, men and women, do have different preferences. They do have different interests. Those will
To a
be taken into
degree,
account.
I would say though that yes, we have different biases. I don't think that in a vacuum of existence, men and women are all gonna like be equal in what they're interested in. I think that women tend to be more pro-social, men tend to be more antisocial. I mean, assertive, etc. I don't want to be sexist. Um, so you're gonna see different people drawn to different career paths, but I feel like a lot of people have this evolutionary myth that it was like the woman stayed in the cave with the babies and the man went out and like, killed animals, brought them back and fed them, and then the woman was just there. And it's like, no, we lived in hunter gatherer society, so it was always a collective effort, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why I want to break out of this mold, because we can't. And just because it was in our evolutionary past doesn't necessarily mean we're doomed, to keep it that way. I mean, we are humans. We do have choice. We can choose, but we do have to be aware of the ups and downs. We do have to be aware of the trade-offs. And like I said, men and women's relationships, if we are successful in getting past this, won't be anything exactly like the past. It will have remnants of the past. We can't get around that. But there are some things deep in our lizard brain that we just can't get rid of necessarily, even though, you know, how much we might try. But it will be something different. And that's why men and women, to a degree, they're going to have to actually talk about this. And it's going to be kind of messy at first. Like you saw a lot with Jordan Peterson, you know, I guess a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was messy, but these were things that actually did need to be said so that we could start having a conversation.
I don't.
Not that he's right.
My takeaway from him was like, wait, women shouldn't be working, and if they do work, what are they doing wearing makeup, inviting harassment? Like, essentially, that's what he was saying, which is absurd because it's like assume that any alteration that a woman makes is somehow different than the alterations that men make. Like, if a man wears shoulder pads to work, does that mean that, you know, he's asking for like sexual harassment just because that happens to be like a sexually advantageous trait to express to, you know what I mean?
Like I said, I do feel it was clumsy, but I do feel that we needed to start having a conversation about these things.
That's clumsy because it's just such a regressive and like shallow way of putting it that made me question a lot of his other intellectual pursuits, because I don't think he's, you know, all that bad with everything he says.
Well, it's, you know, just I guess I was fortunate.
Also, when he was talking about Bill C-16, that was complete hysteria on his part. Unfounded hysteria. He made it sound like the fucking Nazis were going to come in and like be like, you must say Z-Zam or you're going to fucking jail. It was not that, you know, at all. So I'm sorry, I'm a little triggered over Jordan
I see this. We see your daddy issues starting to come out. Okay.
Listen, my daddy issues make me want to be sympathetic to Jordan.
Okay, this is what I would say is that I actually listened to Jordan before all that came out, actually. So I kind of had an idea of who he was. And I would say that you're triggering, it may not be fully warranted in his situation. But we can leave that aside. There's no need to necessarily bring that. But I do say we do need to talk about things. We do need to be able to talk about things. And it's going to be messy at first because that's the way hard conversations always start. But the longer that men and women put off this conversation of what, and you know, this is actually kind of a good point back to the economic things. I think that part of this men and women's relationships will actually be individually chosen to a degree because we can do that now. Each man and woman, if they have the communication skills, they will be able to negotiate between themselves exactly what kind of thing they will have, what kind of a relationship they have. I actually think that's kind of the future, that each person will be able to choose their trade-offs in their relationship and talk about it. And there was not going to be one set pattern, you know, for every person. I almost wish in some ways that the states would make this easier for everybody and they would just get rid of marriage actually entirely for everyone. Because I think if nobody had a starting point to a degree, that would force people to actually be like, are we going to stay together? Well, how are we going to do this? There's no marriage license now. There's no set pattern for us to do it. We actually have to talk about it now.
Yeah. And I definitely believe in like an ideal partnership to me isn't necessarily like, oh, the woman works and the man works and they both equally work. I do think it is about negotiating how that's going to work out. And if they have kids, like I have a friend who had a stay-at-home dad. I have friends who both parents worked, or maybe both parents worked part-time, you know, and were still very involved in their kids' lives. And, you know, then there's couples like my grandparents who are very traditional. And my grandma's an amazing woman, and she was a stay-at-home wife and mom, and she's a boss at it, you know. And I think that's the arrangement that they worked out. And so I see nothing, you know, that to me seems like ideal. It's just a matter of women having that choice without it being assumed like, all right, you have this one singular role in life that is the only thing that you can do and is the only thing that will bring you true fulfillment, unlike men who can get fulfillment through various means. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of like the main point.
Do I detect a hint of jealousy?
What, of men? I would rather die than live as a man. And no, thank you.
No, see, this is again that lefty thing. I tell you, they want all the upsides, but now says, oh, men get to choose all this different stuff. I want to choose all the different stuff, but I don't want any of the bad stuff of being a man. No, that sucks.
I do. I actually want true equality, even if that means if the draft well, ideally, I'd like to abolish something like the draft, but if it exists, I think it's wrong for it just to be for men. In general, I believe in like full actual equality, even if sometimes it's not always great. I'd much rather have freedom and equality and some obstacles than to essentially have my entire life dictated into like one specific mold. But I'm lucky because guess what? This isn't a fucking issue I face thanks to feminists before me. I don't have to like worry about like, all right, I must lock down a rich man and pop out babies with him because that's my only means of survival. Men should be rejoicing too, because this means that women don't have to solely look at these superficial attributes like, oh, is he rich? Will he take care of me in that regard? Like that, in countries where there's more gender equality, it actually is advantageous to a lot of men who typically might have been discriminated based on like their financial status. I exclusively date broke guys. That is preferable.
Well, you know what's very funny is we started this conversation on the economics, and you didn't, and the education system, and you don't want choice there. You want more of a single.
No, well, I view choice as one of the choices being that the state funds a thing. I view what your system is entailing as being even less of a choice. It's worse choices, as opposed to having the most enriched choices that are collectively decided by the people.
Okay. Well, think of because you do want choice in this area, which I agree with. People should have choices. They should have their
but I
choices.
view the government as being an entity that can help create choices. For example, a government can break up a monopoly that creates more choices as opposed to like the natural corrupt way that a business might operate without government intervention.
Look at it this way. We have so many choices of different cereal brands when you go to the store that they're nearly unlimited. The government doesn't tell those companies what cereals to make for people. All the phones that we have, all the different women's shoes that are made, and they're not like we have choices in so many other different areas of products and services.
So. And also they are regulated. Like you can't sell like a poisonous cereal. And also technically it's a fake choice because all those cereals are owned by the same company. It's the illusion of choice.
The same three companies, but not all of them. There's some more. But the thing is that we don't have to go. It's not either top-down regulation or anarchy. Like there is a medium of some government intervention. But my point is saying is that we have so many products in so many different areas without the government injecting funds, or hopefully not messing around with it too much, because the more they mess around with it, the crappier it gets, basically, generally speaking. There's a sweet point. There is some legislation and some rules that do help, but then after quite a certain point, it always makes the product worse and worse for the consumer. And that's another thing that's hard for me to understand is how we have like shoes. Look at how many different shoes we have in this world. And no government was necessary to do that.
By the same handful of companies. I'm just saying.
Some are, but I'm also thinking about the shoes made of all of history, like all of time. There was no government necessary to tell people what shoes to make. And the only time that it did happen was like in the USSR, and they had bad shoes. So you can go read on that if you want about the whole shoe problem in the USSR, because all they would do is crank out one size left foot, and that's what they would make because it was the most efficient, so they could meet their quotas. They didn't care that people couldn't wear them. Yes, you should go read about the USSR at some point.
I will. Don't worry, I'm not a tanky. I don't idolize like certain communist nations or even
what's interesting about it is actually how bad it is when the government seizes full control. That's the main lesson of things that you get.
When a corrupt government that doesn't represent the people, because what a government should be is a democratically elected official to represent the people's interests. But what happens is a lot of times when too much power is concentrated, that's why we need like a more decentralized government where it's not, all the powers in one individual who's like
I absolutely agree with a decentralized government. That's why I want the federalism and I want the states to have it. Decentralization of power is key.
But you have to decentralize the workplace too, because otherwise each boss and CEO is their own little king, and we are just the feudalist paupers at their mercy.
I think you have to let each company do that. And even the bank that I work for, over the years, it used to be much more top-down heavy sort of things, and they have made things much more fluid to where it's not such a top-down approach. I think I don't think that you can impose that on people and it's going to work, because you're just using a more heavy-handed approach to impose it. So you're really disguising what you say by using a more heavy-handed approach to try to fix what you don't want people being heavy-handed. It's like yelling at a kid, "Stop yelling at me! Stop yelling at me!" And you just keep yelling at each other. "Stop yelling at me!" It's like that's not. I don't think you're going to get the results that you want there with that.
And I viewed the government's role as like, we can have like my ideal economy, and like I said, I'm not an economic expert at all. I dropped out of high school, okay? But my ideal would be like, a type of mixed economy with some like market forces. It would be kind of like the ideal balance, whatever that would look like. But I think, so far as like realistic steps, it would just be like basic, sensible regulations, unlike the largest corporations that seem to be eagerly destroying the world, like actually. So that for me was like the path. But so far as like an ideal, I'm not as positive yet on my like ultimate ideal economy.
Like I said, I don't think there is one necessarily, and I do want the power to be decentralized from the federal government, because if that happens, then we'll see a lot more choices come up, and we'll see a lot more. I mean, there's nothing to
Not,
stop.
not these. That doesn't always. That's why people say like if you just like cut enough regulations, like we'll have more choices pop up. But I feel like that's not necessarily how things play out, because there isn't like an even playing field to start with.
Well, yeah, I would agree that just cutting some regulations isn't going to be enough. You actually have to probably change the tax code that doesn't favor the so-called mega corporations that are forming right now. Because, yeah, it does appear that there's going to be 3 or 4 megacorps that kind of rule the world. That's kind of where we're going toward.
Like, they truly do rule the world. And I don't know if you're like anti-climate, science, or I have no idea what your take is on that, but if you look at it from my perspective, they're actually actively destroying the world. They're like these super villains. It's insane, it's just crazy. We've been like frogs in boiling water, that this is just the world we live in and take for granted now.
Yes. You may be interested in an economic site called WTF, happened in 1970 or 1971. They have a lot of charts pointing back to where a lot of our economic problems really coalesced, at least in the 70s. And it's very interesting if you just want to. And they have a lot, like I said, a lot of charts, so they explains things visually. Which helps people sometimes with economic things, instead of seeing formulas and just numbers on a sheet.
Yeah.
And that may be something interesting just for you to look at too. I don't know. I like poking around. I've always liked learning things. I actually have like 2 degrees, BS degrees, just because I'm just always interested in learning things. And I am no economics, mastermind myself, but I like to learn in just a lot of different areas. And that is one site that I found very interesting, because there was some stuff I recognized and then some stuff I didn't recognize. So then I get to look up the stuff I don't recognize, and I get to learn a lot. And it's just kind of interesting seeing that effect.
Great about the internet, because I like learning too, and that's why I do fine for the most part in quarantine, because I have the internet, infinite knowledge at my fingertips. I could just go down one rabbit hole after the other, and
Yet
I
you
end up just
watch,
I know a little about a lot.
yet you watch
And I
Love Island.
listen, that's when I'm turning my brain off. Yes, I watch that, because guess what? I have like 10 hours of screen time a day. So, yes, I fit in some Love Island, I do my iMovie editing, and then I go do my big brain stuff, like read research articles and whatnot.
Okay, well, while we're on Love Island, we got to talk about your take that K-pop is alpha.
Okay, it is fucking alpha. It is. What's
Tell
there to
me how.
Because it's hot, it gets bitches, it's powerful, it's the most powerful music force to be reckoned with. Every time BTS drops a track, breaks world records, bigger than Ariana Grande, bigger than the Beatles. Like, these are astronomically powerful groups, to the point where it's put South Korea, a relatively small country, has gained what they call like the soft power, the cultural power, to the point where the government actually subsidizes the K-pop industry, because they see how that can put influence and get other countries invested in like what's going on in South Korea, and make it more of like a destination. And And also they're hot. I mean, I tend to like the K-pop like female girl groups. Um, but the boy groups, they're definitely alpha as well. But I believe in alpha femoids too. So
Yes, my wife tends to be like an alpha femoid. I often call her a Valkyrie. So yes, women can definitely take that role. But okay, don't you think that it's a little bit clown world, to use that word a little bit, that we venerate musicians and actors so highly?
it's a little, well, I mean, there's definitely issues insofar as like overly glorifying, but I also think there is social utility and the way that people gather around and unify over art in general. So it's, I think there's, and the way that celebrities function in society is they're almost like a blank slate that we project our like values onto. And it's a way of us like communicating with each other, like our values via judging celebrities or highlighting certain ideals. But it does reflect back the negative ideals that people have of like, you know, say like when we idolize people like Takashi 69, who's like I think like a actual like child rapist or something. But because he's like this ideal of like, oh, money and like hyper masculinity. Um, but I think there's, you know, bands like BTS seem pretty wholesome in my opinion. So they people unify over their message of like self-love and acceptance and equality and all that stuff that I like.
Are you not concerned that instead of having a healthy, nutritious meal, that you're eating candy with K-pop instead, and that maybe you just need little doses of candy because too much is bad for you?
I would, well, actually, I do kind of view like my appreciation for pop music. I do kind of see it as like a beautiful, sweet treat, maybe like a juicy fruit instead of just a candy, because it's not completely without any nutritional value. Can some music be just like ear candy? Yes, but I think that that's one of the things that helps keep people sane is some type of simple pleasure because life is just full of existential dread and terror and horrible things. So I think that kind of like ear candy serves its own special utility. But you know, I don't appreciate all genres the same way. I used to, you know, shit on pop music all the time, you know, but I don't know. For some reason, as I've gotten older, I've become a total like big pop enthusiast. And in the past year, I became a K-pop enthusiast. Who would have thunk? I don't know. It just happened.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not going to give you too hard a time for that, but I would say that there is a way to overcome those angst, those fears, those existential terror that you kind of describe, and that instead of trying to just distract yourself from them, if you are working towards something, a transcendental goal, if you have meaning and purpose that you're moving toward a goal, that you can get past those existential fears and terrors.
I have a hard time believing you can get past them. And I mean, I think maybe with like enough meditation and maybe like mindfulness, you can learn how to better cope with them. But I feel like that's like intrinsic to the human experience is like our awareness of mortality and the general meaninglessness of existence. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I actually do believe in God, so I don't have a nihilistic
That,
materialist.
I wish I believed in God. It would make my day-to-day existence probably a lot more pleasant. I wish I could, honestly. I've tried, but I can't. It sucks. You can't make yourself believe something. I mean, I guess some people can, but for some reason, I'm not able to. Um, but I can definitely see the utility of, you know, religion. It's got to be nice, like being like, all right, when all my loved ones die, I will be with them again. I have meaning and purpose. I have a soul. Like, I can communicate to this higher being. Like, that's got to be nice.
Well, I mean, yeah, it does. I don't know about nice necessarily. I guess it depends how you, but it does give you focus and purpose, and it does put things in perspective. And this is what I would say about any, I guess, talk about religion in general, because I certainly don't want to proselytize. That's terrible form. But you have to deal with the abstract threats of the world in some form or fashion, and that existential terror is you've got to have a language to place it in somewhere. And that's what philosophy and theology to a degree give us, is they give us tools to deal with these things that we can't touch or feel: love, terror, old age, mortality, meaning and purpose. Those things that we can't actually, because we've done very well as a society. For the most part, our material needs are met. Most people have food. Most people have shelter. Most people are not in imminent danger of being killed by someone else, every single day. There are exceptions, of course. But most people in modern countries don't have those things. So we've solved those problems. But I do think that our abstract problems have gotten larger now, and that we don't actually know how to deal with them. That's why, obviously, why there's high suicide rates and depression, anxiety problems. We It's like a ghost that you can't see, and you're trying to fight it, but it's not there. Or is it there? You're not sure if you're crazy or not. And there's a lot of times with our mortality, and even with God in that sort of way, that it's not something. I guess I don't know how to help people that unfortunately were not brought up with at least a toe in religion to a degree, because it does seem that something is almost broke inside of them, and they don't understand even the idea of believing in God to a degree.
And I
And
was actually raised in a church, so I definitely was raised in that environment. Like my parents were worship leaders; they were in the church band, so I spent a lot of time in that environment. But yeah, I stopped believing. I think when I was like 11 or something. That's when I started having like an existential crisis, and for whatever reason, my brain started thinking about like huge issues all the time to the point where it's like debilitating.
that was around when your dad left, right?
Well, the thing about my dad like leaving is my dad was an addict, so it was more like he was like in and out of the picture, but he lost his job I think when I was like around 9, so that's when shit hit the fan and we like had to move a lot. So he wasn't entirely gone, but he was, would spend time in rehab or would be like on the streets, etc. But yeah, definitely that time period I think was when I realized the gravity of that. So that definitely contributed to, and it was also when 9/11 happened, ironically, which is today. I actually had my full mental breakdown. I dropped out of school that day. I didn't go back because I was just like, holy shit, like the world is under attack. Like I would just watch the news obsessively and we'd have all these like levels of like terror. And my aunt had worked in this trade center. She wasn't there because she was having a baby, thank God. But like there was like anthrax being sent. Like I remember it was just such a scary time. So that's, yeah. Anyway, it's like getting off topic, but that's when I had my first mental breakdown. So
No, that's actually, kind of interesting, at least, in a personal history sort of way, that you can look back on those events and see how a lot of your, most people's problems did form when they were children, that they have that persist into adulthood. And that's another reason why you can't expect a 9 or 10 or 11-year-old to deal with these abstract threats. They're lucky if they can just walk down the street without falling down and, follow simple instructions. I mean, they're like trying to deal with planes crashing into buildings, and like you said, anthrax being mad. I remember that it was a very crazy time period. And, children don't have anything. The adults could barely even manage to deal with that, much less a child. So I do feel that in the disregard of religion and theology, that we've lost a lot of the tools that we had built up to deal with these problems that we can't touch. And that's why so many young people do feel adrift, and they have such high suicide, anxiety, panic attacks, those sorts of problems. They have no language to deal with this.
yeah, that's absolutely, I mean, I do think we need to replace religion with something. For me, I really don't believe that there is a God. Like it's kind of like convincing me that it would be good for society if we all believed that there was a cat living on the moon who created the whole universe. It's like, I don't,
Do you believe in truth?
well, that's a big question. Do I believe in truth? I mean, I kind of think that everyone's perception is subjective and we're just kind of observing through the filter of our brains and the way light reflects. Having some type of like fundamental objective truth of reality, I'm sure perhaps exists, but that we can't necessarily detect it yet given our level of scientific advancement.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, to a degree, that we don't have direct access to the truth. We only have our five senses that go through our brain matter in our skull, and it tries to interpret those signals that we receive into something that we can recognize some sort of pattern. Generally, what I've found, though, most useful is I actually don't care if people believe in God or not necessarily. I just care if they believe in truth. And that's like 80% of the way there. If you actually believe truth exists somewhere out there, that's pretty much the same almost as believing God exists, at least in my head. I know most people don't see it that way, but that's why in some ways, like I've listened to Sam Harris a bit over the years, had to stop listening to him. He has way too much TDS. Every episode, he's got to bring it back to Trump. And I'm like, oh my God, Sam, why are you doing this?
You think, see, I actually, Sam Harris is another person where, for whatever reason, I end up listening to every single one of his podcasts. So, like, even though I also disagree with him, not on as much, but on, like, certain social issues, I tend not to love how he goes about things. But I don't think he has Trump derangement syndrome. I think Trump is deranged. Truly. It is clear as day. What I think the true derangement syndrome is people who look at him and are like, this is normal. This is totally normal. All of this is okay. No biggie. Like, that to me is deranged. So I'm gonna disagree with you on that bit.
Let's say he talks about Trump a lot when he doesn't have to. He's talking to some guy about the brain and it comes back to Trump.
I see these comments on his comment section of people like saying he has that, but I feel like he doesn't talk about Trump that often compared to how often Trump is like doing crazy things in the world.
Well, Trump is definitely not a normal person, but we'll leave the Trump. Maybe we should have a whole Trump stream and we can just yell about him, because that probably would just evolve into just a fight. Mainly because I don't know. It just seems like, that's another one. It's like, what's the things that you can bring up to actually derail a conversation? Vaccines, Trump, abortion.
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, those three issues are extremely explosive. I think abortions is actually dropped down the list. Abortion is no longer near as controversial for some reason as it used to be. But man. Okay. So there is something in this clown world, because it's appropriate that Trump is actually president, because he's the most clownish of the candidates between him and Hillary that were running, to get against each other. So in clown world, you have to remember that the most clownish will probably win. So who's the most clownish between Biden and Trump?
This is a tough call, but I mean, obviously, I would say Trump is more, but I'm not a big fan of Biden either. I'm very bitter that he's not Bernie right now.
No, which one's the bigger clown, though?
So far as like a not serious, I mean, Trump is obviously, I mean, he's like the most absurd person who I've ever seen on the political sphere. Biden is just senile or whatever.
Okay. Well, then, according to clown rules, Trump should win. But that given aside,
really? The clown world thing, like.
Oh yes, this is definitely clown world. I'm definitely settled on. But this is thing. See, even the clown world thing means
for different reasons. I see the opposite clown world.
I don't know. By clown world, I mean that everything's topsy-turvy, that what used to be, like, people can't make sense of what's going on. Have you ever listened to Jonathan Pajot?
I don't think so.
I'll have to send you then something that he talks about clown world, because I don't mean it in the LARPy meme way that probably most people mean it.
Someone pointed out in chat, like, and I came across that meme via like far right, like Nazi types. I'm not saying you were that. I wasn't even gonna say that, because I've co-opted clown world myself to take back the clown as an analogy of our existence. But yeah, just
I mean, the world is pretty ridiculous. Let's it's definitely ridiculous. And I don't know if people like clown world or not as a phrase, but it definitely kind of encapsulates what's going on. And look, I mean, we have a former, this guy, he went bankrupt 4 times. He's president, right? And even the presidents before him, like Bush, even Obama, Clinton, all these guys, I mean, these aren't paragons of humanity. None of them. They did get elected, yes, in the system that we have, but our system, again, it's not incentivized for really competent people to rise to the top. But something I felt that you're a vegan, right?
Hell yes.
Okay, so what supplements do you take?
I take B12. I take a general multivitamin. I actually take a shitload of supplements. I'm the queen of supplements. Yeah, but I mean, I know the main important one for vegans is it's the B12. Other things that are hard to get are stuff like creatine. I take like amino acid supplements. Yeah.
You take
Wait,
a
why do
essential
you ask?
amino acids?
I actually do.
Okay.
I take the full amino acids. I'm all about that shit. I swear to God, I have like a whole bunch of them.
I am not pro vegan. I do tend to think it's a really bad diet for most people, but at the very least, you are taking what sounds like most of the supplements that you need to do to make it through.
Well, I feel
So
like
kudos.
vegans objectively are healthier than your average person. That's just facts. And I'm not saying it's because the average person eats meat, it's because of the way that our meat is produced and consumed and served. Heart disease is the leading cause of death, and that's can be directly tied into things like fast food. Our like the only reason we have so much meat and animal products available to us for such cheap prices is because it's subsidized by the government. Um, I think it
Yeah, look
ultimately
look at that
moving
government interference again. Dumping money doesn't
well
help the
into
problem.
corrupt institutions. Nah, I don't like that kind of government subsidies. I'd rather have government subsidies towards more renewable energy sources, or government subsidies towards maybe even in vitro meat or other more ethical ways of creating things that are similar to animal products that can help people transition, because ultimately the country is moving towards my direction. I can feel it. Go to Dunkin' Donuts, they have all the fake meat now. Everywhere you go, there's almond milk popping up. It's just a matter of time because our animal agricultural system is impractical. It's making us sick. A lot of these outbreaks we get can be directly linked to animal agriculture. There's a bajillion reasons why people should go vegan. And those are all the practical ones. I think it's wrong to cause unnecessary suffering to animals in general. That's my.
Well, I grew up on a farm till I was about 6 or 7 years old, and we
Uh,
did slaughter animals. And I guess I have a much different perspective of even that brief time period growing up.
well,
I
it's like
don't.
a small farm. I think that's very different. Like my main focus wouldn't be on like small farms, or even like I think it's preferable for people to be like hunters and whatnot. My main like objective would be against factory farming, at least at the moment. And then down the line, ideally, we wouldn't be harming animals for any like frivolous reason. Like if there was like a good reason, it would be probably
I do
different.
think that factory farming is bad for the environment. That's both animals though and plants. So both
Yeah.
factory farming is bad. And this is again, it comes back. That's a good thing. Is that choice again? I want people to have choice and to have the upsides and the downsides of their choices. This even includes their dietary practices. I haven't drinking a soda in probably like 15 or 20 years. Soda's bad for you. Nobody should drink a soda. There's no reason you drink a soda. But should you be allowed to drink a soda? Yes, you should.
But
And
should you limit or like have some government intervention into ways say soda can be advertised, or the labeling of health things that the government has intervened in some ways with soda to make sure that these choices are educated choices. But there is like some balance, like because like for me, I'm generally for like legalizing drugs and think people should be able to determine what they put in their bodies. But then there is also collective harm that can happen when you have just completely free for all. Like I don't know what it would be like if, say, I could like buy crack at Walgreens.
well, none of us do. And again, this comes back to, it's not an option of just release everything at once. Like, again, if we had the 50 states doing their own experiments, not everybody would release everything at once. And you could have different little experiments going on to see how things work, and not everything doesn't have to crash all at once because somebody made a bad decision. Just one state has to suffer, and then they can correct course, and make different change. That's again just my argument again for federalism, and to a degree, so that each of the states can kind of decide, yeah, we're going to make pot legal. No, we're going to make it medical pot. You gotta go to the doctor to get it, or however they end up doing it. I mean, I do think I think most states, almost to a degree, now have at least medical marijuana to one degree or another. I read that there's several states in the South here that are doing pilot programs of marijuana for medical use. So I think that's, it's kind of undeniable that there is some medicinal uses for it, and eventually that's why if there was a less heavy-handed system from the federal government, I think local governments would be much more keen to try these different programs out.
Why do you think that?
Because as it is now, they make too much money from the drug war. Local governments get a lot of money in their police departments from busting people with, a little bit of pot in their pocket. That's money in the bank for them. And as long as you have that the heavy hand from the federal government dumping those dollars into the police departments, incentivizing them to bust people with just pot, which I think, anybody under the age of 40 doesn't care if somebody smokes pot anymore. They don't care if you have a little bit of pot in your pocket. That's only the old people care about that anymore. And so I'm sure everyone here as well is like, nobody understands. It doesn't even make sense to bust people that are just walking down the street with some pot, not doing anything wrong. But you have to understand the local governments are incentivized to do that because they get money from the federal government for making drug busts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's any large system like that will probably have some corruption in it. But if we can hone down the larger system, get it to do less so we can actually pay attention to it and keep it under our eyes, the public eyes, that's just something, again, that I think lefties are terrified that if we pull back the government, the federal specifically, in some direction, pull it back some, shrink it, that like the world will just implode, which it really won't, because we got along without it for a long time.
We got along horribly.
No, you used to be able to you could even buy opium in bottles and stuff, I
think human history has been a mess with like brief periods of like prosperity. So I wouldn't say there was I think overall governments around the world have brought us to a point where, however many billion people can coexist to some degree. That is in itself remarkable. Like,
do you really give the credit to the government for all of that?
well, the government is the people. It's supposed to be, that's the root of it. It's the people's way of collectively organizing and enacting their will on how are we going to coexist. And by it's critical for large groups to coexist that we create various rules that we will abide by that will help us all,
So then would you give the credit to the people that elected or ran the government?
Well, I guess, because the government is an idea that's made by the people,
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to get the causal chain. Is it the actual government
who invented the government, and then the government as it functions would be to credit? But it's a system, so it's like, it's not like an entity that I can necessarily credit itself. But I see it as like being a pretty remarkable thing, as flawed as it is, that like sometimes I'm walking around, like I live in a city, and sometimes it's crazy to me seeing like how many different kinds of people are all coexisting, and life runs smoothly to some degree, like the roads are paved, like if there's an emergency I can call 911, if I'm hurt, I'll just go to the hospital, and even if it's fucked that I'll be financially fucked, it's still, there's just so many different safety nets that we can thank the government for, that I think are critical to the functioning of our society. So that's why I am pro-government.
Well, yeah, like I said, I've seen this, even from the Weinsteins, because I like Brett a whole bunch, but as soon as he starts, it's like I never hear a single idea that shrinks the government from him, and I'm like, buddy, can't you give me one area that at least one thing you'd want to shrink? It's like
the military budget, that's one area that lefties tend to think that we could probably cut back a bit on.
The military, yes.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna, I don't want to. Was there anything else on the list? I'm just curious. Were there any other big topics on it?
Did you watch the latest Star Wars movies, the 3 that came out last few years?
I actually, no, I didn't. I've faded in and out with my passing interest in Star Wars. And I've never been a full on Star Wars.
Don't even bother. You saved yourself some trouble. I was just curious if you had seen them, what you thought of the Mary Sue character in it and how you reflected on it.
Now I'm trying to remember which ones, because it's something I've like periodically seen in the theaters, but I've not like kept track of which one's which.
It's probably not worth talking about to a degree because if you haven't seen at least one of them, you like it's not you don't know the character, you don't know what happened in the movie. So
Even if I'd seen it, I wouldn't know know enough or be like invested enough to have like a Star Wars debate.
did you see? No, I wasn't even going to debate. I was just curious what your take on it was. I'm often curious what people think when they see something because sometimes a lot of people are NPCs, but you do have an authenticity. So I was just curious because it is a really bad movie, so like really, really bad. And I'm just curious what you would have thought or gotten out of it. Did you see Joker?
I loved Joker.
I did too. I thought it was a really great movie.
I love Joaquin Phoenix in that movie. I don't know. That's definitely, it's like in my like top, maybe even my top 5 movies. I really love Joker. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those movies where I was just like, wow. But like I said, I love Joaquin. One of my other favorite movies, The Master, was Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman in it. I just think he's such a great actor, and I'm not a big superheroes kind of person, but you know. Also, someone in chat saying everyone loved Joker. False. Everyone did not love Joker.
Joker was quite controversial. Yeah.
Fairly divisive. Even I think on Rotten Tomato, it only had like in the 60%, which to me, it's the type of movie that should be in like the upper 90s. You know, the only part I didn't like was the girlfriend plot, which I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about.
No, I thought Joker was a really good movie. I've only actually seen it once. I meant to buy it so I could rewatch it a couple of times. It's definitely I would say confidently it's probably a masterpiece of a film, actually.
Really? It is. I've already watched it. Like I saw it once in theaters, and then I saw it once. I watched it at home on like some illegal site, and then since then I've like watched like clips on YouTube. You know, sometimes instead of rewatching a movie, I'll just look up like you can look up like most of the clips, so it's essentially like watching the movie, just by looking them up on YouTube. But yeah.
I'm a pretty big Batman fan, so I didn't want to make a Joker movie. I was totally against it. I'm like, they're just going to screw it up, especially based on how the DC movies had been going. I'm like, there's no way these guys are going to make a good Joker movie. So I was happy to see that was wrong. And you're right. I also like Joaquin Phoenix. He's a really good actor.
He's vegan. But
everybody's got to have upsides and downsides. That we talked about trade-offs. He's a great actor and he's a vegan. 1 plus, 1 minus.
Wow. And for me, that's like a huge plus.
Well,
oh my God.
You got to choose a plus and a plus. You saw him in Gladiator, I'm sure, right?
Not in years. I haven't watched that in so long. I don't remember.
I loved his performance. I thought he was better than Russell Crowe in that. I thought it was great. He played just a crazy, basically, Caesar type character almost to a degree.
Oh, I want to watch that now.
You definitely should go back and watch it just for him. I think it's worth it. I thought he was actually very sympathetic as a crazy person in that movie. It's like I felt bad for him.
Well, yeah, he's very, I mean, even as the Joker, like I was completely invested in his character 1,000,000%, even though he ends up being a murderer,
Yeah, it is odd how the movie does play with your feelings into a degree. And I think that's one thing maybe that upset maybe some people is they thought they were being played with to a degree, but it wasn't done like in a usual. I mean, movies do try to elicit certain feelings from you because they want you to watch it because it's a commercial property. But this felt more like a piece of art that you were interacting with rather than a commercial venture that was just trying to elicit your dopamine loop in your head.
Yeah. And also it's like plenty of like, movies or, art in general have, make you sympathize with someone who's otherwise not very like sympathetic. That's, I think it could be a good thing. The only thing that could be problematic is like, I can definitely see idolizing a character like his. And for maybe someone who's younger and more impressionable, like when I was young and impressionable, I idolized people I shouldn't have idolized. And that does do something to a kid, but I think children maybe just shouldn't watch the movie.
It's definitely not a movie for children. No, yeah. It is definitely adult themes for sure. But, I think I've monopolized enough of your time tonight.
Did you have any final comments against me?
No, I would say just keep doing what you're doing. You're a very authentic person. And I would say don't get too caught up in chasing status, attention, That's bad.
I want more attention. How do I get more attention? Well, actually, I know how to. I was
I was
talking
about to
about it.
say, you know how to get more attention. Every girl knows how to get it.
Oh, like, listen, if I
Yeah.
was confident enough to just be like, you know what, boobs, like, I can't I can't make myself do it. At least on this platform. If it was like a specifically boob platform, that's a different story. But I can't mesh the two for some reason. But we'll see. We'll see how desperate I get.
Oh gosh, no. Come on. Come on.
I'm not opposed to like being like a booby streamer. Like, listen, if I had like triple Z cup boobs, like I would totally be a booby streamer. Like, oh my gosh, all I want for my life is to like work as little as possible and get as much money as possible so I could do as much fun things as possible. That's what I want at this point.
I do have to be honest, for young women it is extremely enticing if they just have a couple of features that are good. You can honestly make a lot of money, but I would also like, because I have daughters, I'm like, girls, come on. I couldn't in good faith. I know though the temptation is there because it's so powerful and it's very immediate gratification.
Being a model, it's like if you won the genetic lottery and you can get paid a ridiculous amount of money for it, can't blame you.
No, I mean, I really can't. Again, I'm a libertarian. I'm all about choice. So, I understand. I just want people, again, to realize the upsides and the downsides, because there's not just all positive with doing that sort of thing. There's also some negatives, and they just need to be at least informed before they make the choice, and just not making it thinking of all the good stuff that'll happen and not realizing some of the negative stuff that will come down later.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of lefties are. I mean, but like I'd say, this isn't everything or an everyone problem of people just have no clue how the world works at all. They just kind of like have their like little slogans and memorize some talking points that back up their initial feeling, and that's the state of political discourse. So it's unfortunate.
And we're back to education. We need
I know.
good education.
I agree. That is definitely critical for a functioning democracy.
We need good education so our booby streamers can do really good on their taxes.
Exactly. All right. Well, I guess I'll let you go. I should probably get ready for bed. It's getting late for me. But yeah, thanks for coming on. It was a nice conversation.
No, it was fun. Thank you for having me.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.